This is Reimagining the Contact Center. I'm Marc Bernstein, and today I'm interviewing Will Bodewes, the CEO of Phonely. What I loved about this conversation is we go deep into what does it take to set up an AI voice agent. I've spoken with a lot of AI voice agent companies, and we talk about how far along is the technology, what is it capable of, what are good use cases. But this is the first time that I went deep with a CEO and said, what does it actually take to make this thing work and to do it well? And that's what we focus on in this conversation. Will has a PhD in AI and energy research, an undergrad in mechanical engineering, one of the smartest people I've ever spoken with. I hope you enjoyed the interview as much as I did doing it. Everybody, this is Will Bodewes, the CEO of Phonely. Will, hey, so good to see you.
Yeah, you as well.
I'm really excited about this. And we were just talking offline that, I've interviewed now about maybe about half a dozen or so companies in the AI voice agent space. And I feel like the audience has gotten a good set of high level takeaways about, where's this technology at? How is it advanced? What does latency look like? But I think the audience is now ready to go like a level deeper and talk about what does it take really to set this thing up and make it successful? Like, what does it take to make sure that it's properly integrated and that the LLM knows your business and knows what to do and has the right guardrails? What does it take? And I thought that could be an awesome thing for us to focus on today.
That sounds great for me.
So let's start with just the high level. What does it take, Will?
Well, I mean, maybe I'll back up a little bit and give you a little bit of a architecture of what's actually going on behind the scenes so that we can dive into each one of the components and have like a successful conversation about each. So from a high level, what we have is we've got a few different pieces that we're like smashing together. And one of them is like speech generation, which is making the AI actually talk. So that's like the last piece. If we think about this as a pipeline, like the last piece is the speech. And with those, we've got a variety of different providers. We've got Cartesia, 11 Labs, a lot of these different providers that have all different voices, different accents, different languages. So that's like the end of the funnel. And then we have in the middle, we've got a large language model, which is what makes voice AI so exciting at this time, is because large language models, the technology has advanced significantly from what it was from what, this old IVR type of system in the ability to respond dynamically to users' requests. Now, this is really great for having a natural human-like conversation, but it does have struggles around, figuring out, is it actually going to say the right information in there? So we have the audio, we've got the large language model, and then we've got the transcription. And so that's the chain of these things that are happening together in order to make a voice agent actually work. And so if you're going to get something that's, working in production that can do a very basic demo, you at least have to have these three components, or there's new voice-to-voice technology that's coming out that combines all these things into one. But it's the same kind of idea, right? Powered by an LLM, using a transcriber and putting out voice.
If I could poke on the second bit for a minute, how far along are hallucinations? Because my take, and I'm not in the same space you are, my take is that it's like almost a solved issue. Like you just need to constrain it to the right data set and then like super explicitly tell the prompt, do not use anything outside this data set. I repeat, do not do it. And like, will some tiny portion slip through? Yes. But like, is it basically fundamentally to deliver a good customer experience at scale a solved issue? It seems to be. Like, what is your guys' take on it?
My answer is yes and no on this. So hallucination, everyone thinks of it as like your AI is going to start telling your customers that it's sentient and it's going to take over the world. And that's not really what happens. The realisticness of what happens is that these large language models, they were trained on this massive amount of data. And so what will happen sometimes is if you don't give it a good enough prompt or you don't constrain it well enough, what it will do is it'll draw from that existing data to tell your customers something that you didn't actually want them to tell. And so when we're building these voice agents, we're seeing that this flow-based architecture, which we've been pioneering for a long time at Phonely, is a really popular approach because it allows us to break down the prompts into sections. So we have like prompt one here, prompt two here, prompt three here. And that is very similar to what we see in, contact centers and call centers as scripting. And so it allows us to break that agent down into these different prompts, which are a set of objectives. And by doing that and with a little bit of backend, powered, you can get very accurate responses on this that doesn't quote unquote hallucinate like we've seen, before in other situations.
Let's talk about that, phone-based architecture with the prompts. How do you guys, first of all, I'd love to hear like what it actually looks like to put those in place. And then there's that kind of like a sneaky question under the surface, which is how do you balance giving the user control and making sure that's really boxed in with not making them set up a whole bunch of rules-based logic that kind of goes back to the pre-LLM days?
It's a hard problem, and it's what we've spent most of our time working on. Like, if there was one problem that we said, okay, what did we do at Phonely? It's like we spent a lot of time trying to solve this problem, which is how do we give the control of a robot and the flexibility of a person all in one, right? And that's from a high level that's hard. We've built our own large language models that do this. Like we've custom fine-tuned models. We have redesigned our architecture like 5 or 6 times at this point to figure it out. But a lot of it comes down to, we constraining a series of questions in enough information that it has a little bit of guidelines and a little bit of rules without basically saying, say exactly this. It's more of like your objective is to get the name, the email, the phone number, and ask the customer if they're over 65. And that is something that can be done in a very natural human-like fashion with, with the style that we have here without having to type in, what is your name? Are you over 65? And so I think that approach we found is just, guided by AI, but still enforced by humans is the best approach as well.
To what extent do you have to tell the AI the rules of like social engagement?
Yeah.
So, and is that a system prompt? So, are you saying like in the event the customer goes in a different direction, politely guide the customer back? Or are you doing that on like an item by item level, being like, are you 65? You cannot proceed unless you go past this question. So, first time, let the ask the question gently. Second time, let the customer know, sorry, you can't proceed. Third time, say, I'm really sorry, I can't proceed. But if you answer this question, then we can continue. But if you can't, we have to end the call. Where on that spectrum does it setup look like?
When you create an account with Phonely in our platform, and I can only speak to our experience here. So there's kind of these two different layers. One of them is agent guidelines, which is exactly what you're talking about, which is like how do you be a human, right? And so those guidelines are just a set of rules and instructions that we found work really well for, contact centers, call centers, businesses, whatever,
It's
that
like
give the
one big
agent
prompt kind of thing.
and it's like, yeah, it's like a subsection of a prompt, right? So it's like here's something you should do every time. You always need to know this. And then
Yeah.
we also have our own we have our own prompting and stuff that we've baked in under the hood that make sure that it does a lot of this stuff. But that's stuff that customers would want to configure. And then so really when you're creating like in Phonely's Flow Builder, all you have to do is type in one line, which is like get the name, email, and phone number. And then it
Mhm.
and then it does that. So like it understands conceptually that information. And we've even gotten to the point where it's like we've fine-tuned and built our own models on top of this to do all of the pieces that we needed to do around it. So it's like got the prompt baked in, it's got like the architecture and everything knows what it needs to do. And then it's optimized for latency and then obviously performance.
Have you found some way to let the AI know how optional and mandatory something is?
In Phonely's platform, it's like you select required variables. So we think about it as a concept because high level concept, somebody is trying to get some information out of another person. Like that's the whole objective. And so for that, we need a few key pieces of information. We need the name stored in a specific format. We need the email stored in a specific format, and we need the phone number before we can proceed to this step. And we will guide the AI to, give it a human-like fashion to get that information. And then we'll say, okay, these three variables are required before it can move on. And so it can't move on to this direction. Like it literally on a code level can't move on to the next direction until all those pieces of information are gathered. But if it's not a required variable, it will try to gather it. And if the person says, no, I'm not interested in that, then it can skip it and it can move on. And this has a downstream effect as well in that, a lot of this stuff we need to build in some integration because it's not just like having the AI talk over the phone, but it needs to put some information in a CRM, schedule an appointment, qualify a customer. Like all of these things require these variables to be captured and stored. And if it misses it, it's not very valuable.
There's so many places we could go with this. Maybe let's go back to the agent guidelines for a minute. I imagine most companies don't have a set of agent guidelines pre-written.
Yeah,
They certainly don't for their, or maybe they have something like it for a human, like it's an employee handbook.
yeah,
Or, we have our 5 principles that we call the smile principles. Is that
yeah,
one, two, it's six. 6 principles, the smile principles. And it's like start with hello. Like, so maybe they have that kind of stuff. Um,
yeah.
but can you like help me picture what it takes to like workshop these agent guidelines with a customer where it's like, yes, this is really a good example of how we want this thing to act and how we want it to feel like a human.
We've done a lot of the work on this already, where we've just like A/B tested like probably 500 or 1,000 different base prompts to figure out what works well. And we've already got that baked in. So when you sign up in Phonely, it's going to be right there of like, okay, this is going to allow it to talk like a person. This is going to allow it to handle objections. This is going to allow it to do, X, Y, and Z thing. If you want to go out on your own and do it, what we have in Phonely is the ability to like A/B test. So you can run an A/B test of two different base agent guidelines and see how it changes things, right? And
Super
I think that
cool.
that's exciting thing about voice AI for one. But yeah, for two, that's one of the best ways to figure out what works.
You're almost able to like give it different personalities.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like you set the personality in Phonely.
That is so awesome. Every contact center is different, and everyone has something that they care more about in their customer experience and something they care less. I've told folk this story a number of times. My favorite customer experience I've ever had is 1-800 contacts, and it was a 3-minute phone call where they had shipped the wrong contacts. They had shipped the contacts to my old address, which was my fault, and I hadn't updated the address, and that was like $500 worth of contacts because I ordered this big shipment. And I call them and they just quickly get the information. Boom, boom, boom. They say, "Yep, shipped to the wrong address. Going to ship it the new one next time." Mark, if you don't update your address, this is on you. Thanks. Have a great day. It was 3 minutes, but it was just such a crispy resolution of my problem. It left me going, "Whoa! I thought that would be a giant pain in the ass, and it wasn't." So anyway, that's super different than how a lot of brands want to, hey, Will, so, tell me, it's probably hard to tell me about your eyes, but like, tell me about, something about your life. So how do you help the brand get what they want in their customer experience into the Phonely agent?
Yeah, well, there's two things I want to touch on here. First off, I think that voice AI is so exciting because of exactly what you just touched on, which is that we have the ability to adjust all these new dials and knobs to get to that perfect customer experience using AI and then replicate it thousand, 100,000, a million times across customers. So I think that that's really, really exciting space that we're at. And then, how do we get our customers there? Well, usually we'll start with the existing call script. So they have some script that they have for their agents. They've got different actions. We work with them to refine that and put that in. So we've got a onboarding process. We'll input it into the system. We'll show you how to set up the first one, and then we make a series of recommendations for A/B testing the agents. And so we'll say, okay, well, usually your highest conversion or your highest bang for your buck in lead qualification is simply just changing the voice. So let's run through a few different voices, try to match the audience. So if it's an older population, maybe we'll try an older voice, we'll try a male, we'll try a female, and then just see which one converts to transfers more, right? That's where we see a lot of it is like, okay, let's start there. And then in other areas, we'll say, okay, well, maybe let's A/B test how we ask this question so that it's maybe a little bit different, or how we give the instructions to say, let's ask this question first, or this question first, or gather the information, just to try to get to that, optimize for minimum time on the phone, whatever conversion that might be, and then maximizing customer experience.
So then let's do maybe like a timeline for a minute. If you could help me picture, my first day, first month, first 3 months, first 6 months using Phonely. First day, I just signed my contract and, I got a email, the welcome, congratulations, you're a new Phonely customer. Like, what does my first day look like? And then a month in, like, where should I expect to be? Like, is it perfect and done and no iteration necessary, set it and forget it, which I think is like the thing of the past, is my opinion. But is it set it and forget it, or are you like deep in iteration and refinement? Like, where are you there? So maybe like 1 day, 1 month, 3 months, 6 months. Can you help me paint the picture of where someone will be in getting their phone, their kind of voice agent up and running?
It's really important to understand the complexity of what you're trying to do. So a lot of where we're at now is building a really good voice agent just comes down to a lot of plumbing, and that plumbing is connecting one API to another API to do this thing, or adding in these integrations. So, day one, basically, what we're going to do is you sign the contract, we're going to send you an email, we're going to say, hey, fill out this form. This is all the information that we need to know to start building your agent. And so we're going to go through this process of the first, 3 to 5 days where we're going to say, okay, from your existing call scripts, your existing call recordings, whatever you provided to us, we'll take that information and we'll whip up a phone agent that we think can perform on this. So then after about a week or so, hand it back to you and say, okay, this is our first step at it. Let's have you test it. Let's try it. We'll go back and forth on that, and then usually that testing process will be like, okay, this is good, but maybe instead of asking it this way, why don't we try to remove this step? We do a couple things here, so it goes through this revision. And then after that point, it's a lot of it's just okay. We need to connect the integration, so we need to connect Salesforce to the phone agent, and it needs to move this lead from this stage of the pipeline to this stage of the pipeline, or it needs to schedule this appointment on this software. And so there's based upon how complicated and how many different quote unquote routes
Yeah.
like we need to do, that's how long it's going to take. But most of our customers are live within 30 days, of doing this. And then it's just a process of saying, okay, what's the goal that we're trying to accomplish? If it's lead qualification, we're optimizing for transfers. So we're going to set up 3 different A/B tests that we're going to run over the course of this month, and we're going to try to get to, whatever percentage conversion that they're looking for, and then we go back and forth until we get that.
Yep. So first day is like welcome, questionnaire, info gathering. About 5 days later, a weekish later, you have a phone agent you can talk to, and
Mhm.
that should represent your script in some way, and is kind of a first, like a starting place of, hey, how do we like this experience? You workshop that for until about a month, where usually a month in, people are going live. And then, so now it's, a month in and they're live. And let's say now you're 3 months in. What is somebody doing there in order to, maintain the agent or continue to improve it or add on use cases? Like, what is the work that they tend to do to continue to make sure that it's delivering the type of experience they want it to?
At 3 months or so, it depends on what the customer is trying to do. If the customer is a very simple use case where they're, qualifying leads, then at that point they're just A/B testing. So they're saying, okay, can we get better conversion by doing this? And then that process can take a while, right? So it's just like as much as you want to do on that, you can. Most of the time, we see that we're outperforming human reps within the first 30 days or less on this for basic lead qualification. But if it's a little bit more complicated, you need warm transfers, you need, multi-step setups. That's where we're at. If we're doing something more complicated, like we're trying to automate a healthcare practice, for example, then we are probably just adding in different routes or different functionality. So we'll start and say, okay, what's the 80% use case? In a lot of healthcare practices, it's cancel, reschedule, and schedule appointments. And so we'll try to accomplish those three within the first month. And then after we've got those routes in, then we're going to add other things. It's like, okay, well, let's add update billing information or update insurance providers or, do X, Y, and Z routes that need to be added in. And in Phonely, what this looks like in our platform is just a series of flows that we build. And then those just take time to build the integrations with the APIs, make them talk to each other, and then make that sound like a human.
So then, now what that kind of made me think is, well, I wonder when you're setting up, one given phone agent, um, uh, how broad do you set it up? And what was came to mind is, I heard you use the word use case. So you could maybe define use case super narrowly and say the ability to book this person for an appointment, and that's a use case. Then you could go a little bit broader and maybe call it a skill, right? Or, a queue. And this would be someone who, it kind of like it would be the AI version of a human, which would be like, oh, this is scheduling, rescheduling, and cancellations. That might be a skill.
Mhm.
And then you might go, broader and say, oh, it's like sales or customer service, and maybe you would say like department or function or something like that. So when you're setting up, these voice agents, are you doing it use case by use case? And then you kind of build them up into a skill? Like, how should you think about like how narrow one bot should be operating, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So the way that we organize it is one bot can do many things. So it's like you have one bot. It's like one bot is one agent, right? And so as you train a customer support agent, is the same way as you would train a phone agent, where you start to say, okay, you can start here. You're going to do these few things. Once you get those few things down, then we're going to work on getting you these few things. And so we basically are just like tacking for more complicated use case. We just tack more things on. And really what this means is we just add more API integrations. And so that's like the quote unquote bottleneck here is if we're integrating with your EHR, and we need to do booking appointments. That means that we need to make an API request to get the availability. Once we've gotten the availability, then we need to parse through that using a large language model to ask the customer that. We've got to ask the customer all their details, and we've got to make another API request to go schedule that in. And so that plumbing takes a little bit of time to go back and forth to get that set up. And so as we go through and we automate the full process of a person, we start simple and expand from there. That way you can immediately get value out of the system without having to like wait until the whole thing is built.
Awesome. Let's go to integrations for a little bit. So maybe the first kind of the first big question that comes to mind is, I think people who are just getting used to the technology are concerned about letting AI take actions in their system autonomously. And obviously, there's some actions that are lower risk, like schedule an appointment. Worst case scenario is, well, I guess the worst case scenario is you schedule it for the wrong day and someone shows up and there's wasted labor or something. But that's not a terrible worst case scenario. But you have another worst case scenario of it crediting a $100,000 refund to a customer automatically, and maybe that's an issue. And then it seems like a lot of folks are solving that again with rules-based stuff, saying, hey, you have the ability to issue a credit, but hard cap credit cannot be above this amount. And that's not something that the LLM is deciding. That's something that some other system checking the LLM is deciding. So I'd love to hear how you guys see integrations actioning. Where do you feel like the limit is today where an AI agent should be able to get, do action all the way up to here, and then past there, it needs to be either rules checking it or a human.
There's this kind of general concept that I think is incorrect, which people say, I'm just going to attach my LLM to this, my software, and it's just going to do everything. And I think that that is a fundamentally flawed way to think about the problem. I think it's more of like we define what we want the LLM to have access to and what we want the LLM to do on this, and then we constrain it to only doing those things, right? And so I also think from a cost perspective, as we think about this, to build out something that's relatively complicated, like, issuing $100,000 refund, there's some point in which it's just like more cost effective from a labor perspective to put a person into that role, at least and unless you're having 10,000 100,000 calls of this per month. It just may make more sense to be like, okay, AI is going to handle 80% of our calls, but then 20% of it we can use our existing call center because it's just cheaper to do that. And so I think that what we're seeing going forward is just like there's this MCP and this ideas out there that that you can just kind of connect it to everything. And I think that there is this really important piece of actually using it in business that requires you to be very careful about the scopes that you give your AI. And that I think that's one of the things that we do really well is just make that process easy.
And how do you think somebody, if I'm thinking through it and I'm trying to figure out, okay, where do I use the AI agent? Where do I use a human agent? How should I be thinking through that decision?
Our customers say, let's start with 80%. What is the 80% use case that we can knock out of the park and save a bunch of money, a bunch of time, etc. And so we optimize for that. And then the next 20% of things, we say, okay, we're going to start transferring that over to another person. And then we're going to pick off these different parts of it as they become more and more relevant. So if it's appointment scheduling, we'll pick off appointment scheduling first, then we'll pick off canceling, then we'll pick off rescheduling, then we'll pick off billing, and we'll just kind of go through that process over the series of, a bit of time as we go and get that set up.
And then, have you found that there's different fields that your customers are comfortable exposing AI to, and then fields that they're not?
Yeah, so stuff around, I think people are still lenient around stuff PCI information. So any sort of credit card information, anything that's dealing with, really high touch point things, they're not as much not as eager to jump into, I guess. But usually, like, it's not something that comes up all the time because most of the time it's like, okay, what is your 80% use case? 80% use case is relatively simple, and so we can try to automate and we try to solve that relatively quickly, and then we start thinking about some other more complicated use cases. We have customers that like we've got call centers that have automated basically their entire human agent portion of the entire call center. So they've got really complicated. It's integrated with their system. Does everything there. So I guess it hasn't been like a huge objection that we've seen, to be honest.
Yeah. It makes me think back to the original Agent Force demo, that they did with
Yeah.
Sophie and Saks. It's funny because at the time, if I remember correctly, he ends up purchasing a coat and also uh, like trading an item or having, no, he ends up trying to purchase a coat and they have to go into the inventory management system and find the AI bot finds a way to send it from a different location, to that customer. So, in that example, it's touching purchasing, it's touching inventory management. So, to what extent do you feel like that was more of a concept car? Or to what extent do you feel like that is like a production vehicle based on what you're seeing with Phonely customers?
Yeah, I feel like that's a bit more of a demo, to be honest. I think we've all used ChatGPT at this point, and we know that it's great, but it's not perfect at everything, right? And so when we see customers come to us and what they do when they're a really good customer, it's basically like, okay, I've got this use case that I am spending all this money answering, having people answer. And it's a relatively simple operation that we're just someone picking up the phone, they're asking a few questions, they're passing them on, or their appointment scheduling. There's something that's like repeatable over, a course of time. We're seeing that is like this is where the opportunity is right now. And if you're not using AI to do some of these tasks, it's like you're definitely falling behind there. When we get into some of this more complicated stuff where it's using, multi-agent systems to find and route things around, I think that we're still a bit of time away from that. It's probably something that can be put together, but it still requires a lot of manual work to get that right and to put the right guardrails in place.
Yeah. So do you feel like that's the limitation or that's the friction point between, where we are today and this like, kind of utopian idea of agent is able to do everything, interacts autonomously with every system without any issues. Is it plumbing that needs to be done, or is it a technological breakthrough or a combination?
Probably a combination of both plumbing and then, yeah, just making sure that it's able to do the things accurately and correctly. I think it's going to be a lot of guidelines. It's going to be a lot of steps in the right direction. We're seeing the MCP is a step in the right direction for this. But I still think that there's this level of control that people want to have. And then also the thing that everyone forgets about as well is from an analytics perspective, you miss out on a lot of that stuff, right? And so if your agent's doing something wrong and you're in the middle of that box, then you don't know about it. And so stuff like this flow-based architecture, stuff like breaking things down allows you to have that insight and have that control. So you're like, oh, if this isn't working, I know why. Or, oh, customers hung up at this point, I can now adjust this and I can tune it. Whereas until the AI is like actually 100% perfect and better than a human at any point, it probably is not going to make sense to do that. And even so, having the control over that is the hard piece that I think that nobody's really figured out yet.
Yeah, one of the things that really hit me that you said a little bit earlier was kind of the idea to fine tune your agent
Yeah.
until it is delivering like the exact experience that you want every time, millions of times. And how like powerful it is to basically training a human, but you're training and training and training, and they get better and better and better, and then that human is like the replicable human at scale, or in this case the AI at scale. So then on the analytics side, what are the sort of things that customers can learn from this when they're looking at, what's happening to their AI agent and like what sort of data is this producing for them that they can use to iterate the agent or just learn about their business?
I think one of the most exciting features that we've shipped around this specifically is just as we think about building an agent, remember I talked about there's those flows, there's state one, state two, state three, and we kind of build this out. One of the most exciting things that I think we have is the ability to look at the drop-off rate at each one of those blocks. So we can say, okay, 100 customers came in, 70 customers went this way, 30 customers went this way, and then, of those customers, 10 of them hung up here. And then we could A/B test that, change that around and be like, okay, how did this performance improve this block? So I think that we're at this really exciting point in voice AI, which is what I call like the e-commerce of the 90s, where e-commerce, like they just figured out that you can put books on the internet, and now it's like there's so much optimization that we can do to, optimize for conversion at checkout. And I think that we're getting to that point where it's a really exciting time to be in voice AI because you can create this agent that is gonna scale to whatever you need it to do and always be the same and be continuously learning, continuously optimizing, continuously getting better.
It makes me think of, I think it was Amazon. They built and patented the buy with one click button. I remember hearing this in business school at some point that they literally had a patent. So if you wanted to buy something on the internet, you had to, unless you were Amazon, you were not allowed to make it take one click. It had to take more than one click because Amazon patented buy with one click. And how funny is it that that was like the frontier of someone's like, oh, we're gonna like get this button, really, really make this button great. And that was like novel. That was different. And now it's kind of the expectation. So I think one of the things that I'm hearing from you is we're kind of at that same point with like these voice AI agents of like it is a brand new frontier and there's so many different areas, is an infinite space of places you could go with it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think at any moment of these big transitions in history, we start to see this, oh, we can do this thing. Now we can like optimize and analyze on it. I think that that's the really, really exciting part that not that many people are talking about how, voice AI can be valuable because it's like right now, like we've seen our customers, start below humans, far exceed them and continuously like making these small steps of improvement on just like an agent. And so in some applications, we're saying this just makes a ton of sense for you to do an AI, and you don't have to worry about any headache. Like no, somebody called in sick, no, wait time. It's like all of our calls are answered in less than a second. It scales up, scales down immediately, and you have different accents. The agent can talk in multiple different languages. You got all this different like stuff that's bolted on. I think just makes it like such an exciting space to be in.
Not just in the voice AI world and the contact center world, but broadly. Based on what you're seeing with your business and your technology, where do you see AI going over the next 3 years?
So I think we might have missed this part. So to give you some background, I'm an ex-PhD AI researcher. I'm in Silicon Valley. Have went through the Y Combinator batch. I've worked with a lot of the top tech people, including like Sam Altman and others around this stuff. So I think that the exciting things for me is that we don't see AGI I don't see it as like, oh, it's going to happen next week or it's going to happen in 2 weeks. I think that we're finding these very real limitations of these large language models. And while they're getting better at a lot of things like coding and some other areas, they're not going to be perfect tomorrow. And so I think that there's this really exciting space that's happening right now, which is you can there's this opportunity of making these models better and good for a use case that exists in business, but also exists in if you're creating a business, but if you're using it in business, to find a company that's doing what you're trying to accomplish with these models, and you're just going to be able to get much better level conversion, and it's going to be able to optimize for your use case. So I think from a perspective as a whole is we're saying these models are getting better, things are improving, but there is still a very real use case for a product and a service to sit in the middle and say, okay, you don't just want voice AI to answer your phone. You want it to transfer 80% of your calls, or you want it to, and a lead qualification, or you want it to schedule 100% of your appointments. Like you need something that sits in the middle. And I think that that's a really exciting piece that's happening in voice AI. And I don't know that I see, I could be wrong, but I don't know that I see that this agent flow thing happening in the next 3 years.
Will, this was awesome. Thank you so much for the time. Really, really great interview. Truly enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.